So we need Nmap, gobuster, and wfuzz. You can download them if install them if you haven't already. And then we also need a word list called seclists. You can download it from GitHub or you can clone the repository, whichever is easier for you. And we also need the user share word list derb in Kali. If you don't have that, like if you're not using Kali, make sure to have that because we're going to be using it a lot today. And yeah, so if everyone's ready, the attendance is in the stream chat, so I'm just gonna move on this slide if everyone's ready, and let's get started. All right, so what is this workshop is going to be about? I'm going to go over a tool called Nmap, and then I'm also going to go into two tools about fuzzing, which are gobuster and wfuzz. I'm going to explain what Nmap is, what a basic command will look like, why you use it, and then what are the common what are the common type of way to use Nmap and why it is useful. And then we're also going to look at what fuzzing is, and then we'll look at two tools that you can use to fuzz things. All right, let's get started. Nmap. So what is Nmap? Nmap is short for Network Mapper. It is a tool that is used for initial enumeration. So basically, when you're trying to discover some information about a network, you usually use Nmap to give you some information about that, just to get a general idea of what you're trying to do, so what you're trying to attack or what you're trying to protect, things like that. So Nmap actually sends a bunch of packets and then analyzes sends those packets to the network that you're trying to analyze, and then based on the response that it gets back, it will say, well, these bunch of ports are either open, closed, or filtered. And then it can also gather information about service versions and an operating system. It also does a bunch of other useful things. It is a really great tool to use, and so that's why we're going over it today. So just before we get started, I'm going to just say some commonly used ports that you must be familiar with if you're going to use Nmap are port 80 for HTTP, port 443 for HTTPS, and then port 20 for SSH, port 21 for FTP, and then, well, MySQL is running on this server, so that's the port that it will be running on. And what I mean by these ports, it means that, like, if you're running this service, oh my god, SSH isn't on port 22, my bad on that. I need to change that. And it means that these specific ports are what is if you're running this service specifically, you have to run it in this port. With that said, I'm going to give you a few minutes to just run Nmap on this IP address. Just do Nmap this IP address, and then let's see what it gives us back, and let's analyze the information. Since Nmap really depends on your operating system, if it hasn't finished for you yet, that's okay. We can just go over it now. I just want to tell you what a basic command will look like if you do Nmap and just your target, what will it'll look like. So this is what you're going to get back if you run this command. So let's see what this all means. It's saying when it started, and then it's saying what the report is for. And then, well, host is up, of course. And then it's saying not shown 997 filtered ports. Okay. And then we also have 3 other ports that is showing your result for. So based on that, it probably scanned 1,000 ports. And well, it gave us the fact that, well, 997 of them are filtered, and then we have 3 other things that are actually going to be open. So let's go over them. So we got port 21, and then port 22, and then port 80, 3 of which are open, and then the service that it must be running is FTP for port 21, SSH for port 22, and then HTTP for port 80, which we already know is the case. If you're running something, it should be on that. So that's the basic information you get if you just run Nmap on an IP address. Okay, now we're going to get into why you get that, and what is this that you get, and what is this TCP, everything that didn't make sense right now. Okay, before I get into that, I'm going to review some concepts about network protocols. So a network protocol is a set of rules that determines how data is transferred between different devices in the same network. So if you have a network, there's going to be a protocol telling you, well, this is how you're going to send data between your devices. So the 2 protocols that we're going to be looking at are TCP and UDP. So TCP is a connection-oriented protocol, which means that you have to actually connect to a server before you can send data or receive data. And how you connect to a server is using a 3-way handshake. Now, how does that 3-way handshake work? You send a synchronous packet to a server, and then you receive your synchronous packet plus an acknowledgement packet. And then if you want to complete the handshake, you send back your acknowledgement packet telling the server, well, the 3-way handshake is complete. I acknowledge that we're connected, and now that we're connected, I can send data, I can receive data if I want to. So this is basically what a 3-way handshake is, and that's what you do whenever you want to connect through a TCP protocol. And then we also have a UDP protocol. UDP protocols are connectionless, so you're not actually connecting and making sure that you're connecting to a server. You're just going to send data and then hope that the server receives it. The difference between UDP and TCP is that for UDP, it's important for you. What's important for you is how fast you want to send your data, and it's not important if like the person that receives your data is actually the one that you want it to receive. If you want to make sure that you're connected to something, then you'd use TCP. Based on that, UDP is faster than TCP connections, but TCP is well, safer in the case that like you want to make sure that you're connected to a server. So in TCP, you make sure you're connected to something and then you send data. In UDP, you just send the data and then, well, hope they receive it. All right. Based on those 2 protocols, we have 3 types of scan. We have a TCP Connect Scan, which Nmap is going to perform a 3-way handshake with each port that you specify. And then, well, it's going to say it's either going to be open, filtered, or closed. How is it going to tell you that? It's going to see if you complete your handshake, well, the port is open. If you send your synchronous packet and then you receive nothing back, well, it just means it's going to be filtered. And this is because some firewalls are implemented so that whenever like they're protecting a port, they're going to drop any incoming packets. So if you send a synchronous packet and then they drop it, you get nothing back, you know it's going to be filtered. And by you, I mean the Nmap. And then if the Nmap receives an RST packet instead of a synchronous acknowledgement packet, it means it's going to be closed. And RST stands for reset packet. It just means that like the port is closed, you can't really connect to it. So we're not gonna perform a three-way handshake because it's just closed. Now keep in mind that firewalls can be implemented so that instead of dropping the packet, they can actually send back an RST packet. In that case, you can't really tell by the Nmap scan that if something is actually filtered or closed. Okay. And then this is how you specify that you want to do a TCP Connect Scan. You do Tacx, capital T, and then it's going to say, well, it's undergoing a Connect Scan. And then if you look at this is actually what we got back before. And this is because if you don't say what type of scan you're going to do with Nmap, it's going to default it to TCP Connect Scan. Yeah, so this is what we got before. This is what we get now. Same information. All right. After that, we have a syn sleuth scan. So what the difference between a syn sleuth scan and a TCP Connect Scan is that instead of performing a three-way handshake, we perform half of it. So what that means is that whenever we get the acknowledgement plus the synchronous packet, instead of giving back the acknowledgement packet, we give a reset packet and then we close the connection. And what since we're not doing a three-way handshake, this is going to be taking us less time to do than a TCP Connect Scan. And it also can bypass some older intrusion detection systems because they are looking for a three-way handshake to make sure that like something is connected. And if like they're not looking for something that like you reset it halfway through, then you can bypass detection. And also connections are often not logged if like it's halfway, if it's not fully a three-way handshake. So you can also not appear in any logs if you're doing a synth scan. And then this is why it's going to be faster for TCP, faster than TCP scans. However, it does require sudo permissions. So if you don't have that, well, you can't use it. And then, well, it is going to give you the same information because it's basically a TCP scan, but it's like half of it. So it's just going to be faster, but it is going to give you the same information as before. And if you look here, it does say it's going to do a sleuth scan, and it does require sudo. And actually, if you run Nmap with sudo, it's going to do a sleuth scan. If you don't do it with sudo, it's going to default to a connect scan. So if you don't actually specify what you're going to do, but you run it with sudo, then it's going to do sleuth scan. And you can see that sleuth scan is actually really faster than connect scan. This is a really small network, so like it'll take like 10 seconds anyway, but usually it'll take more than that to perform a scan. So it's good to do it with sudo if you have permissions. All right, moving on to UDP scans. Okay, UDP scan, as a name stands, it's going to do a UDP connection. It's looking for a UDP connection-ish. It's not connection. Because it's stateless. Okay, so basically Nmap is going to send UDP packets to the target ports that you're trying to scan. And well, based on what it doesn't get, it's going to tell you, well, it's going to be open or closed. So if you don't get anything back from a UDP, it just assumes that it was, well, like it just assumes that it's going to be open just because like UDP is how it is. Like you just send data, you don't know if it's going to get there or not. So it sends it. If it doesn't receive anything, it sends it again. So it sends it twice, and if it doesn't receive anything, so it gets no response, then it will just say open filtered and then moving on to the next port. If, however, it does receive a response, which is a rare occasion, then it will just say, well, it's open. And then if port is unreachable, you actually get an ICMP packet. So basically an error message saying, well, port is unreachable. And then so it's going to be closing. This port is going to be closed, and then you move on. Since you do this twice for each port, if you don't get responses back, and then like you actually wait there for a long time to make sure that you don't get a response back, this scan is significantly slower than TCP. That's why usually you run it with like top ports that you want to scan. So in this case, I'm scanning top ports 20. So I'm scanning the 20 top ports instead of 1,000 that like is the default. I'm just scanning the 20, and then it's just going to give me that all of them are open filtered because I'm running a firewall, so it's just gonna drop the packet anyway, so you don't get a response. It's gonna be open filtered. And then Tacx is how you run the scan. It does also require sudo permissions. To review, we got TCP Connect, we got half open scans, and then we got UDP scans. TCP performs a three-way handshake. Half open performs half of the three-way handshake. UDP sends UDP packets. And then you have open filtered close for both TCP Connect and half open scans. And then for UDP, you have open/filtered, open or closed. The default scan when you don't run with sudo is TCP. If you run with sudo, the default scan is going to be half open, and then if you want to specify to do UDP scan, you actually have to do Tacx. All right. Now I talked about firewalls a little bit. A lot of networks realistically will have either firewalls or intrusion detection systems in place. Firewalls are meant to keep things out, whereas intrusion detection system is for you to like make sure there's no suspicious activity, and if there is, you're gonna block them or things like that. So firewalls are set to drop incoming packets or send and reset packet back, or send an error message if it's UDP back to say that this port is closed because it's trying to protect it. And then intrusion detection system, it's listening on ports. So when you're doing your scan and you're like running a bunch of scripts from the same IP address, someone listening on the log, someone looking at the log, someone listening on the logs, it's going to be like, well, there's a bunch of suspicious activity coming from this specific port. We're going to block them. So since Nmap can be very loud, if its activities are logged, we kind of want to not do that if we're actually trying to bypass intrusion detection systems or firewalls. So how do we fix this? You can use these switches. What are they? So if you do TACPN, your Nmap is not going to ping the host. And so it will basically bypass the ICMP block, the error block that you get when something is closed. But since it's going to assume everything is open, it will take a long time to do. You can also fragment your packets. So what this does is if you have realistically, there's a network that a bunch of people connected daily. If you fragment the packets that you send, you're going to be sending them between every other person that is going to be connecting to that network. And so it's really hard for a detection system to be able to detect that you're like doing something suspicious. Also, if you scan, you use scan delay to add time between the packet that you send, you can also sometimes bypass those intrusion detection systems. It does take a long time again, but if you don't want to be suspicious, that's what you got to do. You can also use something called batsum, which basically generates an invalid checksum for the packets. Now, if any real TCP is listening, it'll just drop it because it has an invalid checksum. But sometimes firewalls just don't know about this, so they'll just respond. And then you'll know that there's going to be a firewall and IDS in place when they respond to batsum. Okay, now I talked a lot, so I'm going to give you a few minutes to look at the man page for Nmap and try to figure out what all these switches do and why they might be useful. I'll give you about 3 to 5 minutes to look them up. wait. I don't want you to be looking a lot at just text. So I'm just gonna go over them. So TACP, as you might have guessed, it has something to do with ports. When you use TACP, you give Nmap a specific range or a specific port to scan. As we saw earlier, if you don't give anything to Nmap, it'll scan the top 1,000 ports. So if you don't want it to do that, and you want a specific port to scan or a specific range of ports, you do TACP. So you can scan TACP for a specific port, or you can give it a range of ports. So in this case, I'm doing 21 to 30. And when you do that, it doesn't skip the filtered ports, it gives them to you. So before we had 900, close to 900 filtered ports, it didn't give us that many ports that are filtered, because that would be that wouldn't make sense. However, if you do give it a specific range, it'll give you like, this is going to be filtered, this is going to be open, this is going to be closed, everything about it. And then if you want to actually scan all ports, you'll do TAC, PTAC. Now remember, there is close to 60,000 ports. Yeah, 65,535 ports. So unless you have to do that, don't do that. So if you scan all ports in this specific IP, you'll see that there is actually something running on port 3034 that we didn't see before. And this is because we actually scanned everything. And this is open, everything else is filtered. This many ports are filtered. It took 15 minutes to do just a sleeve scan. However, since it was a big amount of ports, it took a long time to do. So usually when you're trying to scan something, you want to scan the top 1,000 or top 20 or top something first to get a good idea, and then you let your second scan run for however many minutes that it wants to run. Okay. So if you actually checked out this port, this doesn't have a valid flag. I'm just saying a flag would be here. If it was. Anyways, moving on. Tag SV is going to determine the service and version information. So you've already had the services, but now you have the version information. And what this is useful for is because sometimes some networks are going to be running deprecated version of something, and there's probably going to be an exploit based on that version that you can try to do to get into like your box, or if you're doing something like that. So it's important to know your version and services. So SV actually runs a script to determine version, and it gives a more accurate representation of services. So if you go back and actually do this, actually run SV for this port, you'll see that it's actually going to be running HTTP, not whatever this is. And this is because if you don't run SV, it's just going to give you the service that it should be running, but not the service that it's actually running. So if you want to know what service is actually running, you do SV. Okay. Tacr is going to scan ports consecutively and don't randomize. So Nmap actually randomizes what ports it scans first. So in case you don't want it to randomize and you want an order of ports, like you want to scan ports in order, you'll do Tacr. A lot of scanning tools do that. They randomize, so you want to make sure that you don't randomize when you don't want to. That's just something to add there. And then we have Tacf, which scans fewer ports than the default scan. So the default scan, as you saw earlier, scans 1,000 ports, the 1,000 top 1,000 ports. But if you do Tacf, it'll scan the top 100 ports instead of the top 1,000. You can actually tell how many like top ports you want to scan by like giving it a value. So like Tacf, I think 1 to 5 does this. Yeah, so if you want it to be faster, like if you don't know what ports to scan, but you want it to be faster, you do Tacf instead of like giving it top ports or giving it range of ports. And then we have Tacv, which you get more verbosity in your scan. You usually do Tacv for your second scan, for your aggressive scan, which I will go into later, because you want to get all the information that you it might be useful. It is very loud, so just keep that in mind. But if you want to get more verbosity than what it gives you before, so it gave you like this much before, but if you do verbose, it gives you a bunch of things, and it tells you what it's doing while it's doing them. So if you want to know like how many ports it found by the time that you're looking at it, it's going to give you that. And you can do like Tacv to get more verbose than just Tacv. Okay. And then we have TAC-ON, OX, OS, and OG for output. So you can actually save your scan into a file, which is very useful because usually you're gonna do your scan and then do something else while you wait for it to finish. And if you don't save it to a file, it'll be hard for you to find it later, especially if you clear your screen. You're not gonna find it, and all that time goes to waste. So if you do TAC-ON and then specify a file name, you get everything that you get in the command line into your file, and you can look at it later when it's done. Lastly, we have TAC-A, which is called an aggressive scan because it does a bunch of things. It does OS detection, version detection, script detection, trace route, all the stuff that you can imagine. Again, because it does a lot of things, it is very loud, so you don't want to use it unless like you're sure that you're not going to be detected. Like if you're actually using Nmap on a box that like doesn't detect anything, then do TAC-A because you want to get all the information that you can. You also want to make sure that you save this into an output file because it takes a long time to do, and you'll probably lose it if you don't save it somewhere. And then this is going to be something of what TAC-A will give you. And keep in mind that this server was like running 3 things, and it was really small, and it got this many information back. So if you run it on something that's actually huge, it's going to take a long time, does a lot of things, runs a bunch of scripts to figure out like SSH host keys, and then like runs a bunch of scripts that like might be something that you can exploit later. And then the traceroute stuff that I won't go into. Yeah, that's an aggressive scan for you. I'm pretty sure it also requires sudo. So if you don't have sudo permissions, you can't do that. Okay. With that said, that's the end of our Nmap stuff. So I'm going to give you an IP address, and I want you to Nmap and figure out the flag, see what's in there, check out the services that are running. If there's an HTTP running, check it out, see what it is. And you also don't have to scan more than more than 1 to 7,000. So even if you're doing an aggressive scan, which you shouldn't be required to do, make sure you don't go over 7,000. I'll give you about 10 minutes and then I'll check in to see if you guys need more time. 10-minute check-in. Is your scan still running? Do you need more time? Should I go over it?
How many flags are there?
1.
Okay.
Okay, there's no response. I don't know. I'll just
I'm good to move on. I don't
okay.
know about other people.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to move on. All right. Let's see. What can we do? All right. So I'm actually gonna do sudo nmap just because I wanted to do sleeve scan. I'm going to scan SV because I want an accurate service information. And then I told you that scanning the 7,000 ports would be enough, so that's what I'm gonna do, and then I'll give it the URL. It's gonna take a while, so I'm not gonna wait. I'm actually gonna show you what's gonna happen when you run the scan. And this is one way to do it. Of course, there's more ways to figure this out. You could actually scan all ports if you wanted to. So this is the information that you get. So there is port 22 for SSH, right? And then there's port 80 that's running in HTTP. And then there's some other random port, 6342, that's also running an HTTP service. So let's check that out. Sorry. 63. Oh my god, what was it? Yeah, this is how you get the flag. Port 80 is also running. It's open, so let's check this out. Okay, we got a website. So there's nothing to see here. All right. Do some web dev. Yeah, nothing specific about this. However, this is going to be what our other challenges is gonna use. So port 80, let's keep that in mind. Moving on. Okay, fuzzing. I'm just making sure. All right. What is fuzzing? Fuzzing can be thought of as fancy brute forcing. Basically, you brute force or automate input data to web application or websites or applications in general. Instead of just giving it data, you give a bunch of data and then, well, see which one is actually useful depending on the status or the thing that you get back. When you're fuzzing, you have a word list, and I'll tell you what a word list is. You have a word list. You take all the words in that word list, give it as input to your application that you're trying to fuzz, and then analyze the data that you get back. So how you can use fuzzing is for if you want to find hidden files or directories, or if you want to, for example, authenticate to a website, you can actually fuzz username and passwords. You can also fuzz DNS stuff. There's a bunch of things you can fuzz. So as we saw, in port 80 was open. There wasn't much to see, but maybe there are hidden files or directories that we can figure out. So these are the word lists that are going to be we are going to be using. Mostly the word lists in the user share directory, and then we're also going to be using cyclist for our last challenge. Okay. First tool that is used for fuzzing is gobuster. Now we are trying to find a directory or a file, so we're going to use a directory mode for gobuster. Gobuster has 3 modes. Directory mode is the one that we're going to be using. So what do we give it? We give it gobuster, directory mode, and then we give it a word list, and then what we want to fuzz. So this is the IP that, for example, I'm going to be fuzzing. So what this is going to do is going to take, if this is our word list, it's going to take index, it's going to place it in front of this IP address that I gave it, or the URL that I gave it, and it's going to give me the status of this web page. So does it exist? It doesn't exist. That's why you get 404 back. Next, we're going to do home, put it in there, get a status. I'm going to do user, get it, a different status. 301, I'll go over what that means. And then we go secret, status of 404. And then secrets, that's basically what it's doing. So it's kind of brute forcing, but it's not. So this is the command that you're going to be running, word list, and then these are the things that you get back. That's what I did show you. So gobuster actually doesn't show you the 404 status, because 404 just means it doesn't exist. So like it just ignores it. Why? Because why shouldn't it? But sometimes you want it to, like you want it to tell you, then in that case you would actually tell gobuster, well, tell me the 404 status as well. But it usually, if you don't run it with anything, it defaults to negative status code of 404. As for other things, as you can see, in this case, there is going to be a secret directory, and then there's going to be a user directory. And what these status codes mean are here. So if we have a 200 status code, it just means the request was successful. So basically the URL exists and you can access it. If you get a 301 moved permanently, it's going to redirect you to the new URL. In this case, it's going to give you the new URL, which is the full path or the full URL of what the directory is. So for our purposes, this just means there's going to be a directory, like this exists, right? Can you access it or not? You have to check, but it does exist, okay? And then 302, it just means it's redirecting to another web page. 401, if you get that, it just means you're not authenticated. So even though it says 401 unauthorized, it means authenticated. So if you try to log into a page and you don't have the user information to log in, you get a 401 message saying you're not authenticated. If you get a 404 or 403, however, it just means you're not authorized. So like your IP address doesn't match the ones that like can access this information. So basically you can't access it. For unauthorized, so for 401, you can possibly access it if you authenticate yourself. But for 403, you just can't access it. And then 404 is just not found. So the URL is just not recognized. Okay, with that said, there are two other modes that I told you, which is DNS and vhost, which basically fuzz subdomains. I won't go over it because it's not, well, it'll take a long time. But these are other two modes that gobuster has. Okay. Before we get into the challenge, note that you can actually give, if you have something like this URL and then you say, well, this secret is a directory that exists. You go there, you get a 403 message saying, well, you can't access it. What do? You might want to try to see if you can actually access files in there instead of the directory itself. Okay, and how you do that, you put the secret in front of the URL again, and then you run gobuster and then see if there's actually a file that you can access. Okay, with that said, try to find hidden files and directories in the same IP address. Yeah, I think you can still see the streamed chat message. It's the same IP address. Although you won't find a flag yet, but you should be able to also find a login page. So try to find it because you'll need it later. Okay, I'll give you 10 minutes. You should find the word list in the derb directory in user share word lists. I can actually show you. So cd user share word lists. It's one of these word lists. Just you have to figure out which one. If it's really huge, it's not going to be that one. 10-minute check-in. How are we feeling? Do you need more time? Do you want me to go over half of it? Some hints? Yeah, it does take a long time. You don't actually have to use the big txt file. If you are using that, you could. It'll just take longer. Okay, I'll give you about 3 minutes more, and then I'll go over it. Let me know if you find the flag. You can do gobuster their tag age for the man page. I'm not actually gonna go over all of it, but I will go over some of it. Oh my goodness. Um, think it's here. Yep. All right. Let's just do a simple gobuster. Dir. And then the word list, I'm gonna do common.txt. You could do big.txt. But I think common should be sufficient. If it's too big, like it's not going to be the one, because with all of you doing it, it'll probably make things crash. So pasting this. Oops. Once again, you have to do directory mode. So dir for directory mode, tag w for the word list, and then tag u if you don't want to do http // your IP, you can do tag u to specify that that's the URL. And then what do you know? There is a workshop directory. Now, if you actually try to access this directory, let's see. Right, you're forbidden. But as I told you before, you might not be able to access this whole directory, but you might be able to access something in it. So why don't you try and then keep in mind that the file that we're looking for is a text file. So if you do gobuster dir tacx, I think, yeah, you will stay. There is Tacx and then Tacx. Those are useful. You can look that up and then think about the fact that how this could be useful with the fact that the flag that we're trying to find is in a txt file. I'll give you 2 minutes and then I'll just go over the answer. Okay. Let's do it. So if you've actually looked at what Tacx does, it's an extension string. So you can actually give a file extension to gobuster to look for. And what that does is it puts every word and then with the extension in front of it and then tests that, plus every word without the extension. So if you run gobuster with the extension of txt, because that's a text file, in the workshop directory, I think it was workshop. It's the workshop. You should be able to get the flag. Right, while this is running, we also need to find a login page. Now, usually login pages are either HTML or PHP. So I'm going to try that with that extension to see if we get something with that. So if we do gobuster dir, as we did before, common.txt, the extension PHP, also do HTML, and then we give it the URL, right? See if we get something back. And then this is done. The flag, we got a secrets.txt file. Let's look into that, see if we can actually access it. And then voila, your flag is there. And then if you look at your status, it's 200, which means you can actually access it. It's a file, so the URL will be correct if you can access it. Okay. It's still running, but if you look at the output that it's giving us a home.php, index.html. Those are the ones that we looked at when you go to port 80. And then we have login and logout.php. So login page will likely be in the login.php. So let's look into that. Let's see. Okay, there's a login page. What do we do with it? Don't know yet. I did mention that we can fuzz username and passwords, so it probably has something to do with that. So if people don't have any questions, I'll move on from this for now. So you run it once to get workshop, you run it twice to get the txt file that you're trying to find, and then you run it with the Tacx PHP extension to find the login page that you're trying to find. Okay. Moving on from gobuster to wfuzz. Now, wfuzz is actually wfuzz does everything that gobuster does and some more stuff. So the difference between wfuzz and the gobuster in directory mode is that in wfuzz, you basically replace the word fuzz with all the words in your word list. So wherever you put this fuzz is where the word list is going to put it. So what we had before was like gobuster, and then we had the directory mode, and this is identical to doing wfuzz with the fuzz word at the end of your URL. That's going to look for a directory, right? And then tacw is for word list. Again, tacq is for the URL that you're trying to fuzz. And then this fuzz word you put wherever you want to fuzz something. So it does everything that we did before. So takes index, put it wherever the fuzz is, and then gives us the status back. That's the difference. And then let's actually look at something. So if we run the same thing, Tacx does it in color. Let me just not do it with that one first. Common, and then you. This is basically the same as doing the gobuster that we did before. Now for wfuzz, it actually gives you everything. So 404, a bunch of 404s, and it tells you like, I'm trying this, I'm getting a 404 back. I'm trying this, I'm getting a 404 back. Don't want that. You can actually hide whatever code that you don't want. So you do tacx hc for hide code, and then you do, for example, 404. Now this does look a bit plain. So if you want, you can actually do color in Tacx with Tacx for, let me do it without, so you can see that it'll color it red. And then if you do tacx hc, it'll hide basically. Oops, what did I do wrong? 404, my bad. Basically it does it and then it clears the screen for you, so you can kind of see it but you can't. There's also 403 that you could hide. And then it also gives you the information about, well, the URL that it accessed actually had like 21 line and then 54 words. And then here is the workshop that we found with gobuster. It's here again. Now, what's really useful about wfuzz is that like you don't have to put wfuzz right at the end. You can put it at the middle and then do something like this. You can actually do, if you know that like at the end is gonna be something like ION, you can fuzz the beginning of a word. You can fuzz anything, right? So you can fuzz DNSs with doing fuzz dot. That fuzzes DNS. So that's why I like wfuzz more than gobuster, because you can do a lot of things with it. Okay. Now, with that said, if you want it in color, you can do Tacx. If you want to hide the code, certain codes, so like 404 or 403 that you don't want, you can do tacx hc and then give it the code. And then you can also hide a certain amount of like numbers and characters and words. So if you saw that we had like lines and words and characters, so if you know something is gonna have like 4 words, you want to hide something that doesn't have that. So like 54 doesn't come in handy, so you can hide it with tacx hw, right? With that said, our next challenge, review of the status codes. Our next challenge is going to be on the same IP address, try to find a valid user. So you know that all the users in our system are have their own notes.txt file in their named directory. So try to find a valid user. Basically, try to find a note.txt that exists. The word list that you want to use is still in the derb directory, but it's not going to be common.txt or big data because it's going to be something having to do with names. Yep. I'll give you guys 10 minutes. For anyone who's struggling still, the word list that you want to use is in the other directory. The directory is called other. And then if you just ls, you'll be able to figure out which word list to use. Does anyone need more time, or should I go over it? I'll take that as I'll go over it. Okay, so what does it say? It says we know that user in the system has their own node.txt in their named directory. Okay, so what we're trying to find is basically a name that is valid, right? So if you look into the others directory, there is a file with a bunch of names as word list. So why don't we do wfuzz colored the word list is name URL. So what is this command? I'm doing colored, I'm doing the word list names.txt. The URL is going to be this fuzz notes.txt just because it said the note file is going to be in their own named directory that we're trying to fuzz. And then I'm also hiding any 404 or 403 status because I don't want those. Especially 403 is because you're not allowed to access it anyways, and we're trying to find something that we can access. And a 403 doesn't exist. So there's a lot of requests. Let's see. I think it should be done. Yep. All right. It found a name, Yvonne. So why don't we try this? So based on the our result, Yvonne / notes.txt should be valid. Yep. All right. Now we got our flag. We also got something else. I heard that there is a Magpie user in the database, but I was never able to find its password. Can you? Okay. We did find a login page right before. We didn't know what to do with it. Now we also have a user named Magpie. So basically what we're trying to do is get this password to be able to log in, right? So let's look at our inspect element. And then I'm going to make this bigger. I hope this is big enough. If you go to your network section, put something in, whatever it is. I'm just going to put SSS. Okay. So you get a 401 message saying that you're not authenticated. And then you see that what's authenticating you is a file called authenticate.php. Okay? And then if you actually go to the request, you see that your request is you have a username and then the password that you put in. Please don't put your real passwords here. And then your payload is username, magpie, and then your password, whatever. And then what you're trying to do basically is fuzzing this password somehow, right? Because this is a data that we can give to the website. So how do you fuzz this to get for you to be able to log in? With that said, this is our last solution. Sorry, this is our last challenge. I'm not actually going to go over the solution for this challenge. So your last task is logging into the server by fuzzing the password of a user called Magpie. Yeah, that concludes. I'm going to post this slide later in the stream chat so that you have it. That concludes our workshop. Thank you for watching. These are some related resources. Try Hack Me Rooms and a box that you can try if you want to use these tools somewhere. And yeah, before I finish, next week is reading week, so we don't have any workshops. And then the week after that, we'll either have a workshop or our speaker series, depending on what happens. But next week, we don't have a workshop. Reading week, I hope you guys have a great reading week, or just have a great week if you're not in school. And that concludes my workshop. Anyone have any questions?
Thanks, Delara.
No problem.